Greetings, fellow explorers, and welcome to the 15th episode of Geekoscopy101, the podcast that explores the nexus between science, story, wonder, and philosophy. With me, your host, Dr. Yanis Kisten, and today we're exploring teaching with video games with the developer of Hey Listen Games, Zack Hartzman. How are you doing, Zack?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on today.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I'm always interested in people using new media, especially video games and role-playing games and everything that's new to do professional and or useful stuff in everyday life. But before we get too deep into that, why don't you let our audience know a bit about yourself, who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm Zack Hartzman. I'm a high school teacher in New York City. I've taught a number of different subjects over the years. Currently, I'm teaching United States history to 11th and 12th graders in my school. My school is a bit of an interesting situation in that it's a 100% immigrant transfer English language learner population. So we have students from all over the world who have moved to New York and basically start high school over in order to learn the language here, regardless of their age, as long as they're under 21, going back into 9th grade here in high school. So in my current classes, I have students ranging from 16 to often 22, 23 years old when they hit their senior year. And yeah, I've taught U.S. history. I've taught English language arts. I have an advisory class, which is like social emotional check-ins every week. And I also have dabbled in an elective video games as literature course, which is part of the reason why I'm probably here today.
Yes, indeed. We're going to speak in depth about that in particular, but I am always interested in talking about education in general, because I feel like the world just changes so rapidly, especially now with technology and politics and stuff like that. And I feel sometimes the education systems lag in catching up. So how did your journey to becoming an educator start? Where did the spark ignite and want to become a teacher?
It was really during my senior year of undergrad, I would say. Because I didn't know what I was going to do or what I wanted to be going into college. And then it wasn't until halfway through my sophomore year that I even decided to major in history. And then I'd always worked summers at day camps here in the United States. I don't know exactly if you have you might have similar things going on in South Africa. I know it's a very American cultural thing to have summer camp.
Yeah, it's not really a thing here.
Okay, it's a very cultural American thing, especially in the Northeast for summer camp. So I was a counselor at a summer camp, so I was always working with kids over the years. And one of my friends recommended an internship program where I basically shadow a student at a local middle school by my college. So I did that. I went in basically for an entire year. I would just go with the student to his classes, and I was just there as his shadow for either help academic or social emotionally. And I really enjoyed it. And so from there, I ended up minoring. I very quickly started to minor in education, cranked that out, and applied to different educational grad school programs. And when I was in New York City, I ended up going to Teachers College at Columbia for grad school. And one of the schools that I was placed for my student teaching was this high school that we just vibed very well. So the principal pretty much hired me on the spot come the following school year.
That's pretty cool. I've never heard of shadowing a student before. I know in South Africa, there is the opposite, where students shadow different, vocational things that they might want to do. They might shadow some people in professions. Not the other way around. How does that work? What exactly is the purpose of that?
Yeah, so basically, I would show up at school, meet up with him, and I would just follow him along to his different classes. He'd go about class just as normal, but I was there. Think of it as we have paras in the United States that often sit in rooms with teachers to help them out, often assigned to specific students. So it's kind of in that vein where I would sit with him. If he was struggling with something regarding the work, I would help him with that. Or if there was an issue social emotionally, I would pull him outside the class, have quick check-ins, conversations, just to make sure everything was going on.
Okay. So it's kind of like I would say like a live-in tutor / counselor.
Yeah.
But you with them the whole time. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. It was a partnership between that middle school and college students who were looking to become teachers.
I see. That's interesting. A new concept for me. And on the other side of the spectrum, how did you get into video games as a hobby?
I just got them as gifts every single holiday season.
Okay.
So although I was born in '92, so the NES came out, or the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System came out before me, but the Nintendo Entertainment System was still my first console because my uncle had given it to us as a holiday present. And then basically just every single cycle, new generation, new console, the games, every holiday thing, every birthday thing, that's what was being given to my brother and myself. So it was forced upon me, but I fell in love with it. So it's perfectly fine.
It was forced upon you, but yeah, it was not something you were re-gifting anytime soon.
No, I still have my original Nintendo Entertainment System. I'm not getting rid of that.
Yeah. Well, what were some of the first games that you played? Okay.
Mario was definitely the first one. Favorite franchise is currently Zelda, but it wasn't until the Nintendo 64 that I got into that franchise with Ocarina of Time. But the first games were definitely Mario 3, Duck Hunt. What were some of the other ones? Blades of Steel was some ice hockey game that I don't like hockey, but my brother and I were obsessed with that specific game. There were a lot of games. There were so many games on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Like obscure games also.
Yeah. It's a classic.
Mm-hmm.
So going from that into trying to blend that together with your teaching, what sparked the idea to use video games as a tool?
Yeah, the second I started teaching, I always wanted being relatable was like the most important aspect of my pedagogy going in. So I wanted to bring in aspects of pop culture, be it movies, comics, anime, or cartoons, just anything that was already prevalent in our students' lives. I wanted to bring those into the classroom. Like we need to do that if we want to be culturally responsive teachers. And for a ton of them, that's video games. It's video games for myself also. But I didn't want to use entertainment video, or I didn't want to use educational video games. Right? I didn't want to use games that were made for educational purposes because they're not intrinsically motivated. Like they're created with the intent of teaching you something rather than the intent of having fun. So I wanted to bring in entertainment games that our students are probably already playing, many that I'm already playing, that can be incorporated into the curriculum that I'm already teaching, just to reinforce the content and the skills being taught in the classroom. And the second I started it, it just worked really well. I mean, I won't advocate that it's better than other mediums, like other traditional texts, but as an additional resource, it's amazing. And it's like, I've seen so many of my students grow so much because of those added opportunities of learning.
So how did you try and gauge or measure that it was working? Like, what did you see? How do you tell that it was working good?
You almost have to be in the classroom to see it. So the first real game, I'll say real quote unquote, that I use is a game called Papers, Please, that deals with immigration issues and refugee crises, where you play as a border patrol, not border patrol, like you're basically the guy at the gate stamping yes or no to who can come into your fictional country, Arstotzka, in the game. And my students, all of whom are immigrants, would tackle this game in different ways, where basically you can be very hardline and say yes, no to only the people who are allowed at that time to enter the country, or you can be more empathetic and let certain people through and block other people from going through. And we were connecting it to various immigration acts and immigration restrictions throughout United States history. And just seeing my students engage with the material and make connections to what we were already studying was wonderful. And they were yelling at each other. Because we played together as a class, so they weren't each making individual decisions, right? There's one student playing at a time with the rest of the class giving input. So just seeing them, like the whole class was live, right? And if anyone was there, it's hard to imagine like the excitement around learning that was happening.
Yeah, I suppose it's a participation thing. You're just using games as a medium to drive payment. I mean, to education and interaction.
And even beyond participation, I have students who would never write, who would write about video games. I know one student in particular who's now in college for video game development, would never write. And it's fun. It's a classic story. In New York, we have this Regents exam that they need to pass for graduation in English language arts. And there's multiple choice parts of it, and there's essay writing for part of it. And he managed to pass this exam, leaving one of the essays blank. He just did so well in the multiple choice that he's able to pass without even writing the essay. And it's because he hates writing. But in this course, I had a couple of different types of writing assignments, one of which was write a review of a game in which he wrote several pages for me, and another one was to analyze how a literary element was used in the game, of which he wrote several pages. So the second that he was writing about a game, it changed everything. And he would just he put himself physically in the corner of the room and would just write for an hour straight.
He just had the motivation and the drive to just write about that. Which is really cool. It's always good. Like finding we were talking about similar things on the latest episode podcast that's out with Dr. Anthony Bean about he uses video games as therapy.
I know him well.
Yeah, he uses video games as therapy, and we also had the discussion about using it's very difficult to use games that is made for the purpose. So he also uses like everyday video games instead of games that are designed for therapy. And I kind of agree, because like what's good about video games is that it's fun. And if you don't, put the fun first, you end up with a really annoying video game that you don't really want to play.
That's what I was mentioning briefly with how. So educational games are often intrinsically motivated, where the reward is basically that you learn something at the end. It's not that you're having fun is not built into it. The reward is at the end of it, right? You do these things and then you learn something. Whereas games made for entertainment purposes are intrinsically motivated, right? You're not playing to then get a reward at the end. You're playing because the entire process is fun throughout. Right. And that's the same. You want to apply those same concepts to learning. You don't want learning to be intrinsically motivated where they just do these things so that they can get an A on their report card. You want them to do these things and actually enjoy the process throughout.
Enjoy the process.
Not even care what the grade, because grades don't mean anything in my mind. I have issues with grades in general, right? It should the process is what's important, not whatever specific number is tacked onto you at the very end of it.
For sure. And I've had similar conversations with previous guests on the podcast about how science is taught, especially at an early level. And a lot of it is just throwing facts at kids and expecting them to learn very abstract concepts. And it's difficult. Like it's difficult to build the passion in those kids if you're just throwing stats at them and facts instead of building some kind of story or some kind of motivation that's not just abstract in any way. So that's why we need people like you who are developing ways of trying to bring back making the whole process of education fun.
Yeah.
When I think of like wanting to be a scientist for the early part of my life, it didn't really have to do with school. Like it wasn't the school process that led to that. It was things out of school. Like it was about like watching documentaries and going fishing with my dad and like being on boats and stuff. That drove that. But
Yeah.
I liked it enough to go through the school process and find fun in that. But I could see, like, if you didn't have that context to your life, learning these, random facts, like, means nothing to a little kid, essentially. So that's why, like, I really believe that using these alternate methods of teaching is going to be really important in the future. So I'm really happy guys like you exist.
Thanks.
So what are your top video games you think are really educational and you can learn a lot from, and that's also fun to play?
Oh, there's so many. I'm actually writing currently, or I'm making a handbook on how to do all of this. So I've got a whole list of games, but the ones that I've taught with the most myself are Papers, Please, like I mentioned, Gone Home, which is a wonderful video game. It's a walking simulator from, I think it came out in 2013 or 2014. And the great thing about walking sims is that they're very accessible, right? There's not a lot of demand in the controls. So if you hand a student a controller who's never played video games before, there's an entire literacy that they're lacking. And you can't expect someone to just know how to play.
For sure.
And walking sims, the only action really is you just kind of walk around and interact with the environment, and the controls are very minimal. It's really just about the narrative and the exploration. And Gone Home tells a beautiful story tackling subjects around LGBTQ issues in the United States during the 1990s. So it's a game that can be taught in any ELA or US history class. And another game I use alongside it, usually when I'm teaching it in an English language arts class, is What Remains of Edith Finch, which is another walking simulator, a beautiful game. But there's a whole bunch. If you're looking at World War I, there's a Valiant Hearts: The Great War, which combines. It's portrayed as almost comic booky looking, but it brings in primary sources built into the game. And just pair this with any other text that you're already using to teach about World War I. There's 1979 Revolution, Black Friday, which deals with the Islamic Iranian Revolution. And that one's told in the style of the Telltale series, where you're walking around. It's mostly dialogue choices. In regards to dialogue choices, last year I taught a unit using Batman, the Telltale series. And we actually used that one once COVID really started and we had to switch to learning online. And that class, one of my students asked, can we play a superhero game to lighten things up? So I ended up choosing Batman the Telltale series, and I had them analyze the effectiveness of dialogue choices as a narrative storytelling device. And it was awesome, right? They had a blast, and they were engaging with writing strategies.
Yeah.
But go to, I have my website's heylistengames.org, and if you go there, and I have a whole list of all my curriculum is up there for free. Every single lesson plan, everything is completely up there for free, and there's just a whole list for social studies games, for English language arts games, for social emotional learning games, a couple for science, none for math though, because I'm not a math teacher, so I don't really know all the standards, and it's hard to come across entertainment games that teach math well. Usually their math is more on the educational game side.
Or maybe Dungeons and Dragons help a bit.
It could be, yeah. And I've never actually played Dungeons and Dragons myself, but I do know a lot of teachers who are incorporating D&D into their teaching.
So just explain the broad the goal or aim of Hey Listen Games. What is it exactly, and what do you do on there?
Yeah. So when I like 6 years ago now, first started looking into using video games as resources in my classroom, the first thing my principal said was, show me the lesson plan. All right, what are the standards that you're hitting for these lessons in class? And I started looking online, and there are no lesson plans online. There are for some a lot of educational games will have lesson plans and handouts attached to them, but there's nothing for entertainment games, right? I've taught a unit on using Super Mario Odyssey and how culture is portrayed in that game, but you're not going to find a lesson plan and handouts anywhere for using that game in your classroom. So I just started making over the years. I had to make all my lesson plans. I had to make my curriculum to show my principal that what I'm doing is real. I'm not just playing video games with my students. And in speaking with teachers and educators, a lot of people wanted to see those materials. So I created the website. I put up all my lesson plans and curriculum up there, and it's kind of grown more than that. I blog on it whenever I teach with a video game. I'll talk about my experience with it and how it went. Whenever I make new materials, I'll make a post providing my rationale for using this game and how it can be used. And now I'm also currently making a full handbook that can hopefully act as like the strategy guide for teachers who are looking to start teaching with video games. But yeah, because right now there's really no other websites out there that will offer you, here's handouts to use these games in your classroom.
So it's a very valuable resource.
I hope.
Teachers want to use video games in their teaching.
Yeah.
Anybody listen, definitely go check that out. So if you were tasked with developing a video game that would help with your overall goals, what kind of game would that look like?
If I developed my own game, I'd probably stick to the walking simulator genre in the vein of Gone Home, Edith Finch. There's another one recently I played called Before I Forget, which is a walking sim about dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia. And I think that medium in general is just so accessible across the board for any type of student in your classroom. And it's a very rich source for telling strong narratives, which usually when I'm using a game, it's more often the narrative that's important than the actual gameplay mechanics. All right, because I want my students to analyze the stories. In my English language arts class or in my history class, I'm always looking at the narratives and the stories being told.
For sure. What are kind of the limitations to using that type of game over other games?
Less than people think. Usually when people see or hear about teaching with using video games in the classroom, they assume that every student needs to have a console or a computer, and every student needs to have their own copy of the game. And that's nearly never what I do. I'd say 95% of the time we're playing the game together as a class, projected in the front of the room with one student playing at a time. And we're treating it the same way we would a video, a movie, a documentary, images that are projected in the front. It's just we're usually doing it together. And in some cases, I'll put them into groups, and maybe I'll have a couple laptops around the room. Or if the game is free, because some games you can just play in a web browser. And if then I have a class set of Chromebooks, then every student can have their own copy. But if it's a paid game, we're playing together as a class. So there is a technology limitation, right? Usually I am bringing my own computer or my own Nintendo or my own PlayStation and hooking it up in the classroom. So not every teacher will already have those resources. But if you have a school computer that can run Steam or can run games, then you can already play like 80% of the games in the world out there.
For sure. So yeah, I suppose it's not as time and resource heavy as you would think if you suppose get creative with it. So you also are now have a collaboration with Geeks Like Us on their streaming platform. So how did that come about, and what do you do on there?
Yeah, Geeks Like Us is a wonderful little community. I met them originally about 2 or 3 years ago at a PAX East video game convention in Boston. And they're mostly a group of psychologists who use video games in their practice. You mentioned Dr. Anthony Bean. He's not a part of Geeks Like Us, but we all know each other. And
for sure.
after I attended one of their panels at this convention, and we got to talk and got to know each other. And now I stream for them once a week, and so they have daily streams. Usually once a day, they'll have something in that community going on. And I'm currently their Wednesday stream, where the idea is that I take a game that I have taught with or a game that I plan on teaching with, and I'll play it and I'll talk through the how and why I am teaching with this game. So this past Wednesday, I started a playthrough of Papers, Please, and I'll continue playing that again next Wednesday. And after that, another game I've taught with. And it's just a fun way to engage with other educators. A lot of teachers want to see what it's like, because a lot of the games that I've made lessons for are not the big AAA games that people are familiar with. They're often more on the indie, smaller side. And so a lot of teachers, a lot of people always ask me, like, how do you know about all of these games? Because they're definitely smaller, right? They're not as well known. They're not selling millions of copies. And gaming is my life, so I know about a lot of them. So I want to stream them. I want to show people what these games are like, and how I'm not teaching with 50 hours of Assassin's Creed. These people always ask me about Assassin's Creed, right? I'm playing a game that is probably under 5 hours total. So this stream that I'm doing with Geeks Like Us is to help put that information out there.
What do you think about Twitch and live streaming as a whole for education? Do you think there's potential there overall, or do you think it might be a fad that'll go away at some point?
I think it's just starting. I know I do my streams. There are a couple of other teachers who do similar types of streams, even running PDs through Twitch. And I even last year when I mentioned that I played Batman the Telltale series, I didn't play it myself. I actually had a student who knows how to stream it on Twitch to the rest of the class, and the rest of us were just engaging in the chat. So I'm not advocating for every teacher to go out and do that, but that is a real resource there, especially during 2020 and this going into 2021, this COVID situation. We don't know when this is really going to end. A lot of teachers are still working remote from their students.
I remember when I was speaking to Dr. Francois Nader, I think it was the second episode of this podcast, but he seems to think that esports might become a big thing in schools now to replace regular sports because of social distancing and things like that. It might be a good way to foster team building and that sort of thing amongst classmates. What do you think about that going forward?
Oh, I agree 100%. I already ran, it wasn't an esports team, but I always had for years, I had my video game club. And I know there are tons of organizations right now trying to kickstart esports in high schools. And I see it growing, at least on Twitter, right? I see more and more people talking about it constantly. So I do think, I do, especially as esports becomes bigger on the global scale, right? It's an inevitability. It's going to happen. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, like, esports is massive in terms of...
It's enormous.
In terms of the money going in. So I think schools are kind of like lagging behind on getting students involved. Do you think it's a stigma thing still? Lack of just knowing about it?
Partly, yes. I think a lot of people still hold certain biases towards video games, by far mostly that are completely unfounded. It's just what's been ingrained in their minds. I think on Twitter, I actually saw today an image from Fox News about video games being linked to mass murderers, but like we know that this is all unsubstantiated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just but these things being fed towards people, and unfortunately not everyone is really equipped to critique that information being projected onto them. So there is still a lot of bias out there and towards video games, especially one of the biggest questions asked me always is, what do I tell parents when I inevitably get a parent complaining about me using a video game in school? And I'm lucky in that I don't really ever have to deal in that situation. As I mentioned, I teach newly arrived immigrants, and their parents are the sweetest people in the world. They're just like, whatever you can do to teach my student English and get them to graduate, get them to college, do it. So they're so trusting in me. They let me do anything I want almost. But yeah, it's an ongoing concern for a lot of people.
Yeah. It's I think it's starting to be to turn around. I think it's just taking a whole lot longer than I think we expected it to. But one day I think it'll even out. So what do you think about the opinion on how education systems, either where you are in your city, state, the country, and the world, have responded to this massive change in what happened with the world this year and this kind of new normal that we have now? What do you think what do you think the system is doing right? What do you think they might be doing wrong? And what are your overall thoughts?
I don't even know how to answer. There's so many schools trying different things, and I see very little success like across the board. So like my school is completely remote, and that's good for some students, but my attendance is also usually lower than 50% in the like scheduled time slot. But that means that I'm also contacting students throughout the entire day, throughout like way past school hours into the night, through text messages, through phone calls, just whatever, just like letting them know what they need to do. So we're getting by, but it's not ideal in any way. And my wife's school was planning on going. My wife is also, she's a middle school teacher. They were planning on going to the building, but then staff members, 2 staff members ended up contracting COVID. So then they had to send everyone home. And now they're trying to do this hybrid schedule where they're in some days a week and out some other days a week. But then Wi-Fi is down. So now, it's like, and relying on Wi-Fi is just such a challenge because so many students here in New York City don't have Wi-Fi, and they're relying on just their cellular service, but then they don't have unlimited data. So these are issues across the country and the world. So it's a mess.
Yeah.
I think like there are good things to come out of it. I think a lot of the new technologies that are coming out of it are good and will transition into when we are eventually back to whatever normal is. And I actually do think that the adding remote learning as an option is going to stay, right? Because I'm thinking of my students who are all over age, and some of them have full-time jobs and can't necessarily attend school during standard hours. So I do think that learning remotely is going to remain an option for a lot of students who can't necessarily go to school during the standard 8 to 4 o'clock or 7 to 3 o'clock schedule.
Yeah, I kind of agree that maybe going forward things might be more malleable and students might have more options.
So teachers definitely need to get accustomed to Zoom because that's staying.
Yeah, probably. But I also like the idea of the students having more options in the medium, in the way in which they learn. I think, having the students having their needs met to maximize their learning, I think, is better than trying to force feed them a way that might not be compatible or fit their beliefs or routine or whatever. But I suppose on the other side, it probably makes the educator's job very difficult. Since, like you mentioned, you have to now work at weird hours and
Yeah, the lines between work life and home life are definitely blending together.
Yeah, and I don't think it was easy for you guys before this. So I can imagine being a teacher is probably a lot more. It's going to be a lot more valuable going forward.
If only people in the United States would actually feel that way.
Yeah.
The United States has a problem when it comes to perception of teachers.
Yeah, I think it's similar here in South Africa as well. I think it's one of those professions that, like, it used to be like a noble profession that was, highly regarded, and then over the years it kind of took a back seat, and teachers started getting underpaid and unappreciated, and not a lot of support that they used to have. And it's one of those things where it doesn't make sense. It's such a baseline, it's such an important fundamental thing to society. I don't know why it has declined in perception, and it's one of those weird things. Let's hope it gets better, especially 2020. I think opens the eyes to many problems in various systems, whether it's between healthcare, education, just across the board. And I hope a lot of things sorted out and understand where our priorities need to be and how to address them properly. But going, okay, let's get back to something more upbeat. What games are you looking forward to play in the future?
Oh, well, the new generation is coming down the line. So I think when's the PlayStation 5 and Xbox coming out? It's like in 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, in a couple of weeks.
2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. But the first one I'm going to be playing will be Spider-Man Miles Morales for the PlayStation 5. I love the first game. I'm super excited for this one. There is also Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, which is coming out, which is a prequel to Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is one of my favorite games of the generation. I was super excited for Cyberpunk 2077, but there's just like news story after news story coming out of overworked developers, and it's being delayed again. So I might hold off on getting it, just like stand my ground, like might wait into next year, because that's probably when the game should have been released, instead of overworking the people who are working on the game now. What else is coming out this year? Halo was supposed to come out, so I was excited about that, but that's delayed until no one knows.
Yeah. So you play on all the platforms. Do you always get everything early? So
Nintendo's my love. I am a Nintendo fanboy through and through, but I do also really like PlayStation now. I think this generation in particular, their games on PlayStation have been really good.
Yeah, this was Sony's generation.
Yeah, I don't have an Xbox, but I do have a PC laptop that I can pretty much play any Xbox game on. So I do still play those games when they come out, just not on the Xbox itself.
Yeah, Microsoft is doing something very interesting, and I think if Sony is not paying attention, they might get overtaken.
Yeah, I'm actually tempted to get the Series S because for powerful games I have my PC, but if I just want to chill on my couch, the Series S is perfect.
Yeah, for sure. Even I
don't need this; it's just download only. It'd be wonderful to have.
Yeah, even I've been pondering maybe before I get a PS5, get a Series S, because it's just cheaper. Because I mean, especially in South Africa, we are paying like more than the conversion rate. So like whatever conversion rate between dollar and rand is, we're getting charged like an extra 50% on top of that, and it's ridiculous.
I know that happens in a lot of countries,
and it's like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to afford this thing, but it's no time soon. But I do have a pretty beefy PC that I got for content creation, so I can still play. I mean, I use Xbox Game Pass, and I think is the best value in gaming right now.
Oh, it's incredible, right? I have it also, and I'm currently playing Katana Zero on it, which phenomenal game, super fun. Everyone should go play that.
Yeah, it's every couple of weeks. I think there's just new games coming out on it, and there's
Speaking of that, Celeste is coming out, I think November 3rd on it, and Celeste is one of the best games to come out this generation.
I've heard about it.
It's an indie game, and it's a platformer. Super difficult, but it's one of the games that I teach with, and it's all about having a growth mindset and overcoming adversity. And if it's free on Game Pass, go play it and push through it. It's a tough game, but definitely push through it because the narrative and the gameplay itself are just both spectacular.
I'll have to try because I keep hearing about Celeste like every 6 months, and I'm like,
yeah, it's hard, but it's so good.
Yeah, the universe is trying to tell me something. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's such a good time for gaming. I think it's probably the accessibility, what you can do, the technology is just so amazing. And yeah, we're gonna find out in a couple of weeks what next gen is gonna look like, but it's just gonna be the start.
I'm very excited for next gen, specifically the load times, because loading will be a lot faster.
Oh yeah, I mean, geez, like I'm currently like when I play on the couch, I'm playing on PS4, and I've been playing Genshin Impact, a lot of that, and it's like the load times are killing me. Like it is like sometimes I feel I'm waiting.
They'll be cut by like 80% on PS5.
Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting more than I'm actually playing, like because you're like teleporting everywhere and you're entering different areas. So like I'm just seeing load bars like all day. Yeah, I'm either gonna just get tired of that game or be like, maybe I should just, try and find a way to get a PS5 and play it on there. But yeah, it's gonna be really interesting and fun going forward. So yeah, with technology changing so rapidly, like we said earlier, like how do you think education is gonna change and adapt going forward? Not necessarily to do with COVID, but technology overall. Like, do you think we'll be having classes in like VR or something like that going forward? What do you think is realistic?
I don't think VR class is realistic for at least another decade or two. The tech just isn't there yet. I'd say push it closer to like 20 years from now. But online in general, I think will get bigger. Tech in general is going to get more integrated. Ed tech is like one of the biggest industries in education right now. I feel like every time I'm online, I see more people going into ed tech. And I think gaming is going to end up eventually. In education, there's been an explosion recently in the utilization of comics and graphic novels in schools, and those are mediums that have been ignored forever in school, in the education setting. But now they're being welcomed completely because they are fantastic ways of getting kids to read. And I think video games are slowly moving in that direction also. I mean, the video game industry is by far the biggest entertainment industry in the world, by much more than movies, TVs, music, everything, right? So everyone, there's over 116 million PS4s out there in the wild, right? And I think there's already over 60 million Nintendo Switches, right? These people have these things and they're playing them. So anything that popular is going to come into education in some capacity.
Yeah. I think we're on a cusp of a lot of things in modern culture. It's really interesting to think about just exactly how the world is going to look in 5, 10, 15 years, but it's going to be very different. I mean, as it is, this year has been completely different than last year.
This year's been 10 years long.
Indeed. Every month has felt like a year. But now that we're coming up to the end, I feel like it's starting to go pretty fast. I don't know whether it's just my perception. I just got really busy over the last month.
I don't know. And the U.S. has an election coming in a couple days, so it's like eagerly anticipating that, and then either way, how that goes, the following couple months after that is still going to feel like forever.
Yeah. It's another change to look or not look forward to. But yeah, I wish you guys luck with that one.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I mean, it's really the whole world's problem. Like the US is kind of the leader of the free world, so let's hope we get a favorable outcome for everybody. But I think with that, it's time to pack up camp and head back to our labs and our fantasy worlds. But first, why don't you let our fellow explorers here know where they can find you and your work on the internet, Zach?
So I'm most present on Twitter at HeyListenGames_. Don't forget the little underscore at the end. The other one's taken by someone who hasn't used Twitter in like 7 years, unfortunately. But I also I have my own blog on heylistengames.org. It's not, you can expect posts maybe every month or so about new materials or a new game I've taught with. And on Hey Listen Games, there's also a contact form if you want to reach out to my personal email. You just fill out the contact forms and send it, and it'll go directly to my personal email if you prefer to reach out that way. And now I also stream every Wednesday with Geeks Like Us at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the US. If you'd like to come check out me actually playing the games I teach with.
Yeah, it's a bit rough in my time zone though. I was watching you, I think the other night, and it was like 2 a.m. And that was only because I had just come off a previous interview with somebody on the East Coast, and that ended at like 1. And I couldn't get to sleep, so I just checked who was on Twitch, and you were on there. So it was one of those things.
Cool.
But yeah, it was interesting looking at the Papers game. I think I might want to try and get my hands on it and have a look.
It's a great game.
Yeah, you sparked my interest. Thank you for that, and thank you, Zach, for joining. And thank you to the listener for sparing your time. I hope you guys had fun learning with us today. Otherwise, stay safe, keep well, stay tuned, and cheers.